Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's time for more Storycraft. That is the art of creating stories. And today we're going to talk about plot. I don't remember what number I am in the series yet, but today we're going to talk about plot, and specifically we're going to talk about plot points. This is the sort of micro level of writing a story rather than the macro level. So we're not going to talk about the plot as a large structural device today. We'll probably talk about that in the future, but I want to talk about all the little bits. To me, plot means sort of the events of a story, the order of events that make up a story, and understanding how lots of little events sequence together to create tension and release is a really important thing to understand and a really important thing to put into practice. Because if you don't understand that micro level of the plot, then understanding or having a highly structured large scale work is not going to end up being effective, because your audience may get bored with you or may get annoyed with the way that you are sequencing all those little events and then want to close the book or turn off the movie or do whatever else. I think it's a frequent mistake that a lot of authors make, is to have not enough tension in the story, which makes the reader get bored and close the book. So again, I call these plot points. Some people think of larger plot points, like, oh, this movie has these 3 plot points. But I'm really thinking on the micro level, like the micro plot points. So let's dig into it with the old plot points, or how to confuse your audience. The goal of this is really to make your audience keep guessing and be uncertain about the outcomes of your story. For any plot or any story, you usually have a goal. You have a plot goal or a story goal. And that is the ultimate resolution that you want to have based on the premise that you create in any given story. A really good example of this is actually Lord of the Rings. That the entire resolution is built into the premise. It's like, we have the Dark Lord's ring. Here's the ring. We got to take it to Mount Doom, and we got to chuck it in the fire. We have to destroy the ring. That's right into the premises built all the goals of the story. And so when you're executing a plot, it's a series of events that are going to contribute to or detract from that final goal. Okay. So what I think about it is it's a story event or revelation. That is a plot point when I'm talking about this micro level. So any sort of event, something that happens, or something that's revealed, like if you have a flashback and then you learn something new that's relevant to what you're doing currently in the plot, that's also a plot point, because it changes the audience's perception of what's going on. So a good plot point will increase the uncertainty of the plot goals. That means you're not sure if the ring is going to make it into the fire. You're not sure anymore if the goal of the story will actually be able to happen. Or you're going to decrease that uncertainty. You're going to increase the certainty of it. You are now more sure that they're going to make it to Mount Doom and actually chuck the ring into the fire. A plot point, it's a story event or revelation that usually changes or alters the plot goals or the means of achieving the plot goals. So in some cases, you have one sort of story goal, and then that gets altered at some point in the story once something is revealed or once the characters understand a little bit more of what's going on. So it can change or alter the way you're doing it or the way that you're going to do it. So you may think, oh, we're going to go through the Black Gate and then drop into Mount Doom. Turns out we can't go that way. Now we have to go a different way. That's obviously a significant plot point. And if any of this alters the audience's perception of the goals, then it's a plot point. Whether they think it's now like a fool's errand or something like that, that's going to be important if you're doing plot like this. Incidentally, a really, really good example of this is from Lord of the Rings. In Lord of the Rings, the way it's written in the book, you have some really good moments that definitely create a great deal of uncertainty. So just as an example, at the end of what is called Book 4, it's really the end of Two Towers, because it's 6 books in 3 volumes. It's kind of weird how Tolkien wrote it and how they ended up publishing it. But at the end of Book 4, Frodo is captured, but Sam has the ring. And then Book 4 ends. The next book, the beginning of Return of the King, Book 5, has only the events of like Pippin and Merry and Aragorn and Gimli and Gandalf. And at the end of that, they go to challenge Sauron at the Black Gate, and out comes the mouth of Sauron with Frodo's mail and Frodo's sword, which significantly increases the uncertainty of whether Frodo is going to be successful at this quest. And if you think from the character's perspective, it massively increases the uncertainty, because they think now that Frodo is dead, which means the quest has failed. And you as the audience, you know he's not dead, but you're not sure how the quest is going to be fulfilled anymore, because we know that we think, well, he can't have been rescued because they have his mail and his sword. So he probably wasn't rescued. He probably died. We have a great amount of uncertainty in the way that the story is going to actually transpire from then on. So there's a really, really good example of that. At the end of this, I'm going to give some more great examples of the micro point of this using a very, very important movie. So how do you make a plot point effective? The first thing is that you're always playing with expectations. That's the way that you're really going to make any kind of story event, effective. And there's two kinds of expectations. Remember, there's external expectations and there's internal expectations. External expectations are all the things the person carries in to the work with them. Internal expectations are the things that you establish for the audience. So, we have to destroy the ring. The audience has an expectation you're going to destroy the ring, or we have to cast it into the fires of Mount Doom. If you challenge that possibility, that would be like we find another way to destroy the ring. But you still have to, and I put this as a disclaimer, you still have to work within the rule set for believability. That means you can't have a unicorn come out of the sky and accomplish something. That would be Deus Ex Machina. You can't have magic that previously you didn't establish happen. That would also be considered Deus Ex Machina, which I will mention probably in a little bit. So you're always playing with those expectations. The audience expects things to go a certain way, and you're manipulating those expectations as you have events happen, where some unexpected things happen and some expected things happen, or things happen in ways that aren't expected that kind of change the way that the story's going. So you're always playing with expectations. You have to be aware of the expectations you create and the expectations people have. For instance, external expectations, I mentioned those in Star Wars. If you're creating a Star Wars movie, people are going to bring in all the expectations they have from other Star Wars movies. If you're writing within a particular genre, like, say, mystery, people are going to bring in a bunch of expectations for how you're going to execute that mystery plot. So those things are all important for understanding how you're going to make that effective. Ideally, whenever you have an event happen, it's going to cue back to whatever you did before. So, something unexpected happens, but the audience is like, oh yeah, he did set that up. So in a lot of cases, you want as the story goes through that it's still referencing things that happened before to keep the logical consistency there. And that's the challenge if you're writing something like a thriller or a mystery, is to keep people referencing back to clues that weren't obvious before. And then you want to, with any plot point, and this is basically what happens when you create an event in a story, is that the audience then has expectations for what's going to happen in the future. They have an idea of like what the next plot point should be, what they want to happen, and what they think might happen. And so now that you've established those expectations with one event, you're going to toy with them in the next event. And then this is just a disclaimer: avoid Deus Ex Machina, that is God of the Machine. That's if something really like a non sequitur happens to resolve part of the plot or to move the plot forward. Suddenly a unicorn drops out of the sky and carries people off to safety to avoid them like falling into some fire pit. That would be Deus Ex Machina. Somebody mysteriously happens to have, there might be an extreme coincidence. Somebody happens to have, a lightsaber that should have fallen and become dust into a giant cloud planet. That would be a type of Deus Ex Machina, or just an extreme coincidence that moves the plot forward. And you really want to avoid these in resolutions. You can have some coincidences that sort of create the tension. It's like, this person stumbled into my inn, and he happens to be halfway through this quest, and now I have to complete the quest. That's a coincidence, but that's one that kind of begins the plot, not one that resolves it. You don't want to be like, well, I guess we're going to fail here, and then it's like, oh, turns out we can just do this and resolve the plot this way. So those coincidences are the Deus Ex Machina as a resolution you usually want to avoid. And I am aware that in the Greek tradition, they often just ended a play with, God of the Machine type stuff. So I'm aware that that this is a modern bias, but those are generally a good piece of advice to avoid upsetting your audience. So here's some things that aren't a plot point that a lot of people get confused with plot points when they are making something. So I apologize for the digs, but the first one is that action is not a plot point. That's just things happening, right? because it doesn't alter what we want in the goals. Somebody winning a gunfight or winning a sword fight is a plot point because it will change what's happening in the future. Action can be tense. It can be a tension creator. These are things that I guess can create tension, but they're not really like a story point, a story event. And I don't know if JJ is listening, but action is not a plot point. Having things explode is not story. That's just things exploding. And if you don't have any stake in things exploding, it's not going to feel tense at all. It's not going to be an effective tension builder either. So action like a gunfight or a sword fight isn't an actual like story event or a plot event. A good example would be Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. You have this very, very sort of prolonged lightsaber battle between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. The lightsaber battle is not really the plot point. The plot point is when Luke gets his hand cut off and you are now completely uncertain about the outcome. You think, oh my gosh, Luke has now lost the fight, and the negative outcome, the outcome that you didn't want to happen, has happened. Which is part of why Empire Strikes Back is so effective, I think, is that you have the negative outcome prevail in the end. And then, of course, Darth Vader creates a revelation, I am your father, which alters everybody's perceptions of how things have transpired before. Those are major story events, and they happen right next to each other. And really, really pound home this sort of leaving on a tense moment, this resolution that's unwanted in Empire Strikes Back. Okay. Characterization is actually not a plot point. So if you have two characters talking about something that lets you get to know those characters, that's not a story event. And if you fill your book with only characterization, some characterization is usually good, especially with, I guess, like modern sensibilities with writing. But if you are doing nothing but having people reveal the finer details of their personality, it's going to end up being boring. That's just a cautionary tale. But having people just chat, reveal things about themselves that don't have to do with the story itself, those are not plot points. Okay, that's just characterization. Sex. I bring this one up because a lot of people, again, just like with action and explosions, people mistake sex for plot. They think because human beings are interested in sex happening, that must mean that's an interesting plot. It's like it's not really, because there's not necessarily any tension. So sex is usually used more for characterization than it is for a plot device. However, it can be. Like if somebody unexpectedly cheats on their husband, that would be a plot point. But it isn't always. In a lot of cases, it's just not. It's just characters doing something that doesn't alter the outcome of the story goals at all, right? So usually sex isn't that, but it can be. Non sequiturs are unrelated events. Those are not plot points. So non sequiturs can be something that's very interesting but isn't related to the outcome of the story. And a really good example is in Stephen King's The Stand. There's a section called No Big Loss, which is just a bunch of little mini stories of people dying in this in this apocalypse. So they're just dying one after another due to really stupid things. That's not plot. Those are just things that are sort of filling in, giving you a broader picture of the universe and the setting. That's like setting sketch, because those events don't have any effect on the goals of the story itself. So those are actually non sequiturs. And another example of a non sequitur is Peter Griffin fighting the chicken. You have a chicken pop out of nowhere and start fighting Peter Griffin. Yeah, that might be funny, but it's not plot. Right, don't mistake the two. And exposition and description are also not plot points. So if you're filling things with page after page of prose describing, the landscape, that's not plot. And if you're trying to keep your manuscript really tight, some of the exposition, some of the description needs to be integrated in to the story itself, or it needs to be cut. I'm not going to tell people how to do that per se, but just know that exposition and description is not something that is story. That's just contributing to the setting, which is important to the story. And I want to say it's not important to have exposition, but it's not plot. Okay, it's not the MacGuffin as some people call it. Okay, so I'm going to give you a really, really good example. And these videos, I'm going to link you some videos down in the description box. You can go ahead and watch them in order. And I'm going to go through how the filmmakers, and especially the director Frank Darabont, who's also the screenwriter, actually execute a bunch of little events to really amp up tension, create massive uncertainty, and then resolve it and bring the tension back down to a really satisfying level. So if you haven't watched Shawshank Redemption, turn this off and go watch Shawshank Redemption. It is a really, really good movie. I highly, highly recommend it. And I don't think you're going to find too many people that think it is bad. It's a very, very good movie. It's a very effective movie. And the first time you watch it, it's always the best, kind of like the game, you know? So turn it off, watch it. Otherwise, I want to talk about some of the ways that was made. And so, oh, by the way, this is based on a Stephen King story. So Stephen King wrote the original novella, the short book, and then Frank Darabont wrote the screenplay and turned it into Shawshank Redemption. I think both are good. I like the movie. I probably like the movie slightly better, just because you're bringing in so much. And so this is based on the movie events, but it's pretty much it's very, very similar events in the novella. So first event, Red finds out Andy has gotten 6 feet of rope. Background to this is Andy had found this guy who had shared a cell with a guy who said that he killed this golf pro and this woman and pinned it on a quote, a banker. And I think in the novella, it's actually a lawyer. It's like a different profession. But Andy, now we have this massive story goal. Like Andy could get freed from prison. How great is that? And then that gets dashed on the rocks when the warden has that man murdered in the movie. He's murdered. And so Andy's chance of being freed is destroyed when the man who would testify on his behalf is murdered. That is a major plot event, creates a new plot goal. We want Andy to survive prison and have him not snap. So Andy survives prison, it doesn't snap. That's our new goal. So our event, Red finds out Andy has gotten 6 feet of rope. What are you thinking? Well, you're thinking we're uncertain that he will be able to not snap. Will Andy commit suicide? Next event that happens, you see Andy shining shoes ambivalently, like he doesn't really care. Then that actually makes that negative outcome, like will he kill himself, uncertain. So the total uncertainty decreases. We're like, Andy seems okay. He's probably going to be okay, right? And next, you have Andy holds the rope and stares off into space. He picks up the rope and he just kind of stares off into space, kind of listlessly. And the result is the uncertainty increases still. Will Andy kill himself after all? We don't know for sure, but we think that he's probably going to end up killing himself. Then at the end, we have Red reflect on his fears while he's in his bunk. He says, "This is like the longest night of my life," and that just increases the overall uncertainty. That is actually not a plot point, by the way. So Red reflecting on his overall fears, that goes back to like thoughts, right? So he's continuing the tension. He's drawing it out over time in the movie, but that's not really a plot point. I should mention that. So I put it down here because it's a great technique and it does increase uncertainty, but it's not really a plot point. Okay. Next, there's a couple of other events that happen. So the light comes on. Next thing you know, it's morning. There's been this storm. The light comes on and Andy doesn't exit his cell. What are we thinking at this point? At this point, we're thinking, uh-oh. There's now the negative outcome. We are pretty certain of it. Andy killed himself. All right. So now instead of being uncertain about whether Andy will sort of make it in prison and be okay, we're now more certain. We've increased certainty. We're certain that he's killed himself, that the outcome we didn't want to happen has actually happened. That's where the certainty starts to happen. Then you have the guard come in and he says, "Oh my holy God." And in that moment, you have the peak of the negative outcomes, the certainty of the negative outcome. You are sure now that Andy has killed himself based on that reaction. And you're going to feel really low, right? That's super effective. But notice they don't show you what happens, because the next thing that happens is the warden pulls out brown shoes and here's an alarm. And those two things are two events that happen really close together. So he pulls out the brown shoes and the audience is like, what? and he stares at his own brown shoes, like kind of amazed. And then you hear an alarm. And so now we're not certain what happens. Like, what's this alarm about? And why does he have these shoes? So the certainty of the negative outcome starts to decrease. Next thing that happens, Warden's in his cell. What do you mean he just wasn't here? What happens? The negative outcome is now resolved. We know he hasn't killed himself. So there's a huge resolution of tension. And he's not in his cell. The overall uncertainty takes over. Where is he? We don't know where he is, but we're so glad that he didn't kill himself, because now the negative outcome's been eliminated by this little plot point, this little event of the Warden saying, it's a revelation. He's revealing that Andy is not actually dead. So then the Warden finds the tunnel. That's another revelation, right? And what do we think about that? Well, the total plot goals begin to resolve. We understand once we see the tunnel that Andy has now escaped from prison, and he is no longer in Shawshank prison. He's escaped, and we are now able to sort of in a more full fashion realize the resolution of the plot and be happy that the negative outcome didn't happen. So a big part of that tension in this sort of series of couple scenes, and they happen very rapidly, but it's a really good example of great filmmaking, because you have a bunch of little things happen one after the other that really ratchet up the tension. And you're positive at a certain point that Andy's killed himself, and then it's all pulled away, and there's a huge release, a relief that the protagonist has not offed himself. And so that's a really good example. I will have those videos linked down below, and do want you to take a look at them. This is that micro level that I talk about, having one thing lead into the next thing and be constantly working within what your audience expectations are to create the overall story. And I like thinking about those details. I think it's really good to master those details before you start to think about really, really large scale works. And that's not to say you shouldn't attempt to write your novel or your screenplay or whatever it is, but you want to think about how things are going, like one event into the next, to keep the tension high, keep people turning the page, keep people watching the movie, and not putting it down until the end. And you're going to do that by having that level of uncertainty. We're not sure what's going to happen. We're not sure if the protagonist will be successful or not. And the more convincing you are with creating that uncertainty, the better it's going to end up being at the end, when finally you're able to resolve the plot, or you're able to create the negative outcome happen, like with Empire Strikes Back. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I hope this has been useful and fun and interesting for you. I will see you next time. My book is linked down below, Muramasa Blood Drinker, that's now out on Amazon. I have other books. They will be coming out soon as well, hopefully, as soon as I can get them edited and get book covers designed and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to support me, support the channel, consider reading the book. It's 99 cents. That's a very small price even for an ebook. So pick it up, read a couple words, see if you like it. And I appreciate it as well as if you've read the book, please leave a review to help other people decide if that book is for them. The reviews really help me out as well. The more reviews the book has, the more people are gonna think it's something worth taking a chance on, even for 99 cents. It's good to have a couple of reviews, even if they're not like totally. I love positive reviews, but any review that helps your fellow consumer out, I think is worth doing. So I appreciate it. You guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.